Hello and welcome to Meet the Writers. I'm Georgina Godwin. My guest today is a German novelist and publisher who's had a remarkable literary and humanitarian journey. Born in Kiel, she grew up in Schleswig-Holstein and Hessen before moving to London in the 1980s to study Arabic language and literature at SOAS. After graduating, she worked as a journalist with Reuters in London and Agence France-Presse in Paris. She's written 5 acclaimed novels exploring themes such as family dynamics, memory and reality. But beyond her writing, she's also known as the founder of the award-winning independent publishing house Pyrene Press, a name many literary fiction lovers will know for its beautifully translated novellas from around the world. Her latest work, Shams, draws directly from her involvement with the Al-Sama Project in Lebanon, a groundbreaking education initiative for refugee teenagers determined to escape cycles of child marriage and labour. The novel offers a candid and compelling look into the lives of young refugees in one of the world's oldest camps, Shatila. Meike Ziervogel, welcome to Meet the Writers.
Thank you, Georgina.
We've known each other for a long, long time. I haven't seen you for ages, and it's really lovely to see you back here because, of course, you just disappeared off to the Middle East, but we'll come to that. Let's start with your sort of origin story, if you like. I wonder how your family history in northern Germany, growing up in northern Germany, shaped your view of the world.
I always felt incredibly lucky that I was born into the family I was born into Western German family, that I was able to go to school, that I eventually, once I finished school, I was able to find my own way. So I left Germany, I traveled around the world a bit, I eventually ended up here in England, I studied Arabic, and those kind of freedoms I understood very early on. A lot of young women, especially young people around the world, don't have.
What was it that drew you to Arabic language and culture?
So as a German, of course, I studied the Second World War at school. That was one of my major subjects at school. And so after I finished school, I went to Israel because I thought I wanted to see what Israel looks like with my own eyes. And of course, once I arrived there, and that was in 1986, so even before the first Intifada, I realized I can't stop here. You know, this is just one aspect of reality. The other aspect, big aspect, of course, is the Arab world. And therefore, I was determined to also understand that side. But even back then, I realized that to really understand that, I need to learn the language.
Talking about going to Israel, did you have any Jewish heritage or you were just interested?
No, I was just interested.
Your studies eventually led you to a career in journalism. And I wondered if you could tell us about working for those major news agencies like Reuters and AFP, and if it, in the end, influenced your later work as a novelist.
Yes, I always was driven by wanting to understand reality. And I think when I was young, I believed that reality is what we see. So initially I thought journalism will give me the tools to explore reality. What I found in my personal way of looking at reality, that wasn't enough. And that's why then I went more into literature, into art, into the arts.
You've written 5 novellas, often quite introspective, often psychological. I wonder what the central themes are that keep pulling you back as a writer.
Yes, they're very obvious themes: war, displacement, and women. And a lot of the times, mother-daughter relationships. And the theme of displacement and war, again, is linked to my own family because my grandparents and my parents, they came from Eastern Pomerania, which part of which is now Poland. So they fled into what became East Germany and then eventually what became West Germany after the Second World War. So this idea of displacement was there in my family, and the heritage of the war, the impact of the war on our psychology, I found incredibly interesting all my life long.
And why the mother-daughter concentration?
Because I'm a daughter of a mother, of course, and I'm also a mother of a daughter. And I'm about to become a grandmother as well. So I also think women in war are often portrayed as victims. And also we as women often like to see ourselves as victims. But I have this absolute belief that the world wouldn't be what it is if only 50% of the population would have signed up to patriarchy, to war. And we women have a huge part to play in it, but we don't own it. And we need to own it. We need to look at it in more detail in order to then actually realize that we have shaped every single thing. We have co-shaped that with men. It's not just, the male population who have created all the horrible wars, all the patriarchy. No, it's us as well. And I find that absolutely fascinating that we as women, and this is of course a huge generalization, tend to escape into this sense of victims.
Do you think that changes across nationalities? Because, of course, you've had exposure to women in very many countries. Is it different in a different culture?
No. No, not at all. I mean, it's really fascinating to see, for example, so I've been, over the last 6 years, I've been working with women who, of course, you could see outwardly are huge victims, victims of war, of displacement, coming from extreme patriarchal structures and families, where they've got, the women themselves got married at 14, give birth to girls who then also get married at 14. But who, by the way, is driving their girls to get married at 14? It's often the mothers who insist and don't help their daughters to maybe escape this aspect of early marriage. So even there, I so often find myself thinking, and I also know women who have said, no, my daughter is not going to get married at 12 or 13 or 14. And the power they then have, so they can make changes, small changes, and they have to be incredibly tough. But they have to be incredibly tough. But if they own it, if they say, I need to make a change, for example, for my daughter, they can.
I mean, one of the points you make in the book, though, and we'll probably get onto the book in more detail later, though, is that when you have a large family, and quite often these girls are part of many, many siblings, her marrying off early is one less mouth to feed, and quite often you'll get some dowry too. So you're making money and you're not spending money. You can see why people would do it.
Yes, but it's a short-term solution, isn't it? Because long-term, of course, if the girls and the boys would be going to school, would receive an education, eventually they could support their larger families in a far more long-term way than if they are sent off to get married, and also, or in the case of the boys, to collect plastic on the streets.
Let's talk about Peirini Press. I wonder what inspired you to start an independent publishing house. I mean, it's a very, very difficult thing to do.
So Peirini is with Alzama, both of them, I'm really, really proud of. So again, actually, when people look at my professional trajectory, they feel it's a patchwork. They have said to me, it's a patchwork. You start off as a journalist, then you became a writer, you set up a publishing house, then you co-founded Alzama, an education organization for illiterate teenagers in the Middle East. Where's the logic here? The logic is there. I've always wanted to help empower women and give voices to women who haven't been listened to. So initially, I thought I can do it through journalism. With Peirini, I published a lot of women authors who had been known elsewhere in the world, but not yet in the English-speaking world. And now I do it with Alzama. So in some ways, Peirini, because when I lived here in the UK, I set up Peirini in 2008. That was the point where I had gone through my journalistic career. I had started writing. I had my children. And I thought I wanted to actively shape the literary scene in this country a bit more.
I mean, you got, 7 international Booker nominations?
Yes.
For the books that you published? Yes. What sort of stories were those?
So a lot of them, again, women who are struggling to find their voices, but who are fighting to find their voices. And I think that's really, if I look at sometimes as an editor of Peirini and as a publisher of Peirini, the books I chose were also predominantly about, women trying to find their voices.
The publishing house began with European novellas in translation, but it has grown far beyond that. So how did it evolve over the years under your leadership?
So under my leadership, we only published translated fiction, novellas, short novels, because, again, that is one of my passions. I then, in 2018, went to Lebanon, and I eventually stepped down from Pairini in 2020. And why did I say earlier that it's one of my proudest moments is because I, so to speak, in inverted commas, gave birth to Pairini, brought her up, and she's now, doing her own things. And that is, as a founder, one of the best successes you can have. It's growing, it's still going, and I hope it will be growing and going for many more years.
Why did you decide to step away?
Because I had started my work with Alzheimer. And in 2018, so that was 10 years after setting up Pairini, I remember thinking, I've done what I could do with Pairini. Because again, I also think for startups or, the founder has to put in so much energy and so much of their own vision into a startup, may it be a publishing house, may it be an educational organization. Eventually, I think it is really important as a founder, if you want to give the organization chance to survive, that you need to step down. And I felt by 2016, 17, I started feeling, okay, I wonder if it is time now to maybe move on. How? I didn't know, because I also wanted to make sure that Pairini is in good hands. And at the same time, of course, I wanted to go, I wanted to develop further. I didn't want to stand still and just step down, and that's it.
Now, let's talk about the Alzheimer project. Tell us how you got involved and what the project does.
Yeah. So in 2018, our youngest child, our son, finished school and went off on a gap year to South America. And so my husband and I, we thought, okay, we need a gap year. And we therefore decided we had an opportunity to volunteer for a local organization, NGO in Lebanon, because I had done a book called Shatila Stories under Pairini, in Shatila, in fact. So that's a big camp in Lebanon. And in 2016, I think it was, I went out there and worked with some young writers from the camp to help them co-create a novel called Shatila Stories, which was then published by Pairini. So I had those connections, and of course through my Arabic. So my husband and I went out there, and we only wanted to stay there for a year. And in fact, my husband did go back to his job after a year. And I, during that year, had helped a group of women to turn from Shatila, refugee women, Syrian refugee women, to turn their needle art workshop into a business. And I felt by the end of the year my work was done. And however, I had then got to know another Syrian refugee woman called Kadria Hussein. And the two of us then decided to set up a very small kind of empowerment center for some refugee girls we had got to know in the camp. 13, 14-year-old girls, Syrian girls who were a lot of them were already engaged and they couldn't read and write. And so we thought, okay, we'll just do a bit. That was late 2019, early 2020. And at that point, my idea was actually that I would keep my hand slightly in Pairini. I would go back and forth. And then something happened that neither Kadria nor I ever expected, which was after about 2-3 months. And what did we give the girls at that point? 3 hours a week, that's it. A bit of creative thought, which came from my creative writing idea, some yoga and some, so to speak, empowerment classes. And suddenly these girls who come from illiterate backgrounds, and I remember when I first met them and said, so what's your dream? What do you want to do? They couldn't look me in the eye. They didn't know what I meant, so to speak. They suddenly lifted their head, looked us straight in the eyes and said, we want to go to school. We want to go to university. Please help us. How do we do that? And that was really the moment where Kadria and I thought, okay, if we do this, we do it really seriously. We're not going to do it like any other NGO, doing empowerment actually what we've started doing, empowerment courses, a bit of English here, a bit of, reading and writing there. No, I mean, the essence of education is, of course, continuity. And therefore, we need to set it up like a school. And that's what we then did.
And I mean, you've achieved astounding success. These girls are going to university.
Yes, hopefully next year is the first intake will move on to university. We've now developed, because initially, again, we thought, okay, let's, we took some curricula that are out there, the Syrian curriculum, the Lebanese curriculum, some African country curriculum. And we tested them on our students. But of course, these are 12, 13, 14-year-olds that have had a massive life experience. And to then start with them like a primary school child doesn't really work. So we realized very quickly, if we have students that are clearly really clever, really intelligent, we need to develop a curriculum that suits them. And so that's really what we've done. And again, I always say we've actually co-developed it with our students together. So we now have a curriculum that within 6 years makes up the 12 lost years for illiterate teenagers. I mean, it is remarkable. I mean, the students are just such remarkable young people. And I can't wait to see when they get to university.
Now, your latest book, Shams, is very clearly taken from life experience around this. It's set in the camp. It is about an educational project that gets going. Tell us about the character Shams herself.
Yeah, so Shams is a young Syrian refugee woman living in Shatila. And she is fighting to get an education. And of course, she's an amalgamation of all the young women I've been working with over the last 6 years. And what always strikes me still, I mean, these young people come from such difficult backgrounds. I mean, they come from often illiterate backgrounds themselves. Their mother and fathers can't read and write. From huge families, they've seen war at first hand. They live incredibly impoverished situations. Often there's a lot of domestic violence, domestic abuse, of course, and you look at these young people and you think, if I had experienced a tenth of what you have experienced, I'm not sure I would be able to function. And of course, we have 4 informal schools, 2 in Shatila, 2 in Burj Barashne. We have just set up our first school in Syria. We have a psychologist working with, in each of these schools. But we give these students, in fact, so little, and they are self-healing. I mean, that power I wanted to somehow encapsulate in a novel, because it is something that is very difficult to describe. I mean, so often, I recently had a conversation with the CEO of Montessori, and she was saying when she heard about Alzheimer and our success, our students' success, she said, this is contradicting everything, we believe about the importance of early childhood development. Because if you take these young people Alzheimer is working with, they had such a tough beginning in their lives. And then they arrive in Alzheimer. Yes, they are totally self-motivated. No one sends them there. Often they have to go through resistance of their parents to actually want to, go to school. But then the way they can just turn, I think, their, all that bad experience they had in their first 12, 13 years into an incredibly positive energy is outstanding. And I don't know how to otherwise put it into words, except that I thought I have to express it through art, because I can't describe it otherwise.
And so the character of Shams was born. But the novel is, in fact, told through several different points of view. Just tell us about the structure.
I mean, as I said to you earlier, so my idea about reality, I increasingly, in fact, the older I get, and I was thinking on my bike down here to the studio as well about this, we think reality is what we see, and it's made up of so many different aspects, and it's continuously shifting. And again, all my novels really, or most of them, have multiple perspectives. And this is to do with that I think, if I tell you this is reality, no, that's just my perception of reality. You might have a very different perception of reality, of exactly the same situation. And so this is something, I think it is, this idea of integrating that into my artistic work, So that's why even Shams has many different voices. But of course, the most important voice next to Shams in the novel is Shatila. So
the camp itself.
The camp itself. Because there and that wasn't, so again, I wanted to, of course, describe Shatila, but Shatila has been described. You can go onto Google and you get hold of, multiple descriptions of Shatila. And Shatila is, of course, only one example of an increasing, I think, amount of camps around the world. We think of refugee camps as something transient. We think of refugees. We even call it refugee crisis as something temporary, transient. But that is absolutely not true. I mean, so Shatila and 9 other camps in Lebanon, but there are other camps around the world, have existed now for 70, 80 years. You have generations of people, in the case of Shatila, of course, Palestinian refugees, living in these camps. And they're not transient. So I wanted to express that. What is that? Why are we thinking that refugee camps are transient, while we as the world are clearly turning a blind eye onto these, what I describe almost like black holes. Once you're in these camps, it's also incredibly difficult to get out because you are outside everything. The refugees living in these camps don't have passports, don't have rights. They have absolutely nothing. They have no rights to work, nothing. All of the stuff that we're taking absolutely for granted. And it's not easy then to just step out of these camps and say, it's almost as if, once you're in there, you no longer exist.
And you use the voice of the camp itself. Shatila, she's a mother, but she's also a whore. She's a carer, but she's the opposite. It's a...
Yeah. And again, I wanted to express what I experienced, in camps, in Shatila, in Borj Barashne. I mean, of course, the camps themselves are safe havens, in inverted commas, for the refugees because they have nowhere else to go. And so if you are in those camps, you are, again, in inverted commas, safe because, of course, you're not safe at all. I mean, it's really tough to live in these camps. It's almost like a big, ugly, spidery mother kind of figure. You get sucked into it as a refugee, you want to leave, but you don't know how to leave. And there's this pull almost, because as long as you're in there, of course, there is a logic, there is a community, and it's very hard because the outside world doesn't allow you to leave. That's really important. And I wanted to somehow describe it. I also wanted to catch this other contradiction about how, because I was just thinking, if the world, I mean, and I've seen it, for example, in Lebanon, in last year's war in Lebanon, there is a lot of international money coming, a lot of international aid. So somehow I think, we, the world, wants to help. But do we really want to help? Because it seems to clearly not lead to any development. We're standing still, and at best it's getting worse. So, are we really wanting to solve the refugee crisis, in inverted commas? Do we want to really get rid of the camps? And we, meaning the world community here. And I sometimes doubt that. Because it just doesn't seem to, nothing is pushing forward. Yes, there's money coming in that is going totally to waste in most of the cases. Mm-hmm. And again, I wanted to express that contradiction,
Of course, because you do have a character, Mr. Tony. He's the head of a charity. Was he inspired by someone real, or is that you just representing the broader idea of these aid agencies, which don't seem to be having a great deal of success in terms of moving people on? Yeah.
So again, he is an amalgamation of many, many people. But it's also, even Al-Sama, we are an education organization. We're not emergency relief work or whatever. But I think any charity runs the risk of serving themselves if we are not very, very careful. Again, a very clear example for me was last year during the war in Lebanon, and especially in Beirut, because we operate in Beirut. I remember when we set up Katria, my colleague said to me, education is always the first thing that goes in war. Well, it is actually the most important thing. And she said, when the war started back in Syria, schools closed, never to reopen again. And so last September, when the war started to really happen in Beirut, of course, all the education organizations, everything closed. The international organizations took their CEOs out. And part of me, not just part of me, and I was just thinking, it's so easy. So easy that this happens. Like in Alzheimer's case, for example, I was also under pressure from the UK and the US board to leave the country. And I was thinking, no, now we have to stay. As long as our students want us to continue, we need to continue because that is a lifeline for them. And it's important to actually say to them, no, you keep your eyes on the education. We help you with that. We will find ways, even while you're fleeing, even while you're, living out on the street, we will help you to keep hold of your education because that eventually is the only way we can change something.
There's one very disturbing scene in the book, which I won't go into, but I wonder how you find the balance between that darkness and hope, and perhaps in your own life too.
Yes, yeah. And thank you. It's a very good question. It's the Alzheimer's students. Of course, sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and I think, how did I get myself into this? And I look at my life and I think I could have had a different life. I could, still be living in North London and go swimming in the women's pond, which I love doing. But I find myself running Alzheimer. And when the going gets tough, my heart rate goes up and I think, we now have huge responsibilities. But then I just need to think of some individual students. And they are so inspirational. And inspirational in the sense that I think, God, if we can manage, Alzheimer can manage to help these students to get to university, and if we can create a critical mass of these kind of students getting to university, one or two of them eventually will actually, I think, help us to rethink, to restructure our thinking. Because that is part of my belief that I think, you and I, my own children, my grandchildren, they will all, we're incredibly lucky to have received really good education or good enough education. We're born, into a country where we didn't have to experience immediate war, hunger, and these kind of things. Ultimately, and I'm taking there myself, I ultimately think I don't think I will be able to totally rethink, our black and white thinking in order to find solutions, because I have too much to lose. So there will be always something that will stop me from totally rewiring myself. And I think the young people that Alzheimer is educating, they actually will be the ones, not all of them, but one or two, it only needs one or two, that could make a leap of imagination that none of us can actually perceive of.
What's next for you, Meike? Are you working on another book, or will your future work continue to be shaped by your humanitarian involvement?
Of course, I have started my next book. I always write, and my aim is to stay with Alzheimer until 2033, because I think by that time I will have been able to set up Alzheimer in a way, or help to set up Alzheimer in a way that will allow it to stand on its own feet. Therefore, then, of course, I'll be ready to hand it over to another CEO. And eventually, I hope that one of our students, in fact, should be the CEO. I think 33 might be a bit too early. It will be the CEO afterwards. But I will keep on writing. Of course, my work with Alzheimer, what I'm learning there about myself also. So I think the next book will have probably a bit more, not about myself. All the books have something of myself in them. but actually the conflict I'm experiencing by doing a work like Al-Sama, by finding myself living in Lebanon, I think the next book will be discussing that more, but in a novel form.
Well, I can't wait.
Thank you.
Meike Ziervogel, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Georgina.
Shams is published by Salt Publishing and it's out now. You've been listening to Meet the Writers, thanks to the production team of Steph Chungu and Mariella Bevan. And you can download this show and previous episodes from our website or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.